In this video, I want to show you how you can take the great documentation that DBT will generate for you, but make it accessible to your organization and do so in a way that's secure and make sure only those authorized can access that documentation. So as you already know, if you're familiar with DBT, it can create great documentation about your project. And that's really easy to create in your project. DBT docs generate is going to go through your models, understand all those relationships, and build that documentation for you. And what that would do, if it's not already populated, is populate all these files in this target folder. And we can then view that documentation by doing dbt docs gen observe. And we can now view the documentation for our little DBT project. However, as you'll probably already be aware, this is only accessible to you on your local machine because it's just running a local web server. So to get the most on this, you want to make this documentation accessible across your organization. And to do that, we're going to publish it to an Azure Static website. And then we're going to protect that website behind your existing Active Directory, so that those in your organization with that Active Directory login are able to view that documentation. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is create a new GitHub repository. There are ways of doing this where you can have GitHub itself generate your documentation and populate your static website directly from your primary DBT repository. That's not something we're going to go into today. Today, we're just going to generate the documentation ourselves and have it displayed on a website. Okay, so I'm going to create my repository, DBT docs. Okay, and we're going to make it private. And we're going to create our repository. Okay, if you're familiar with Git, you're probably just going to clone that repository locally and commit the relevant files. However, in the interest of time, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to upload existing files. And I am going to grab all the files in that folder. So you can see we've got this target folder. I showed you everything inside that target folder, and not the target folder itself. We want to put into GitHub. Right, now that that's complete, I can commit all my changes. And we're ready to go. So that's part one done. Right, now part two is we're going to go to Azure and we're going to provision our service. So it goes without saying you have to have access to create, provision new Azure services for your organization. Once you're logged onto your portal, you want to create a resource and you want to create a static web app. Okay, this is the one we want. And create. Okay, set your subscription and resource group. Give it a name. Set a region if you need to, but this bit's important. But plan type. So if you are working on a public project, public DBT project, and you don't need to provision authentication, then you can actually create this service for free. There's no cost in most cases. However, if you need to add any level of authentication, particularly the Azure authentication that we're going to be using, you do need to use the standard plan. So there is a cost for this. The cost is relatively small. something like $5 or $6 per month. And that gives you a fairly generous level of bandwidth once you've got that. But do look into that if you're concerned. Okay, so the source for our deployment is going to be GitHub. And if you haven't already, it will prompt you to link your GitHub account. So you can see that you already, because mine use the same login, it's already connected those for me. Once done, you want to select the repository for your project. So I want to click this one, and the branch is going to be on the main. And we don't need to populate anything in here. So we click next. We don't need any tags. So we click next. And create. Okay, so that's now provisioning that service for us. There we go. So there's one thing you're going to want to do immediately before you do anything else. And that is we're just going to put some very basic credentials against this service. That's because your website is actually now live and publicly available. So we're going to go into configuration and general settings, and we're just going to put in a quick password. Okay. So now if we go back to the overview tab, and we can see we've got this auto-generated URL for our project. We now click on that project. You can see we'll be prompted for that password we just created. And we can now access our documentation. And honestly, you might be more than happy with that level of authentication, especially if you've got a small group of users. But of course, the thing you've got to consider is once that password's out there, anyone can access it. So having that Azure authentication is going to be better. But let's just go back to our repository quickly and have a look at what's actually happened behind the scenes, because Azure's done some stuff for us. So I'm just going to refresh my repository, and you can see that Azure has created this folder with our workflow in it. So workflow is what GitHub uses to make actions against your repository. So what will happen is anytime you commit a change to your documentation, i.e. you add some additional documentation, you make that commit back into the main branch. As soon as you do that, that's going to trigger this workflow. And that's going to essentially update your website with the latest changes to your documentation. Okay, so now that we've got our basic website up and running with some basic authentication, we now need to go back and configure what we need for the Azure authentication. So first we need to do one thing back in our repository. We need to add a file to the root of our project. So I'm going to come back, this is my repository, and as you can see, I've already added the file. So I've created this staticwebapp.config.json file to the root of my repository. If we have a look at this file, it's a fairly simple JSON file. It's a copy and paste job. I will provide a link in the description to a repo of mine where this file is available. You only need to change one thing, which I'll show you in a moment. But really what this file is doing is telling the web app what parts of your website you authenticated and unauthenticated users are allowed. So notably, there's a root that we've defined here that basically says all content within our web has to be authenticated. That's the basic rule that we want, with the exception of our kind of login process, where an anonymous user can access the login process, which of course is necessary for them to become an authenticated user. You will need to change one thing, And that is you will need to provide your tenant ID on this line here. Okay, so that's going to be unique to your Azure environment. If you're not sure about your tenant ID, you can go back to your portal and you can search for Azure Active Directory, and your tenant ID is displayed here. Just copy that value and paste it back into this line here and commit that change to your repository. Okay, so as I've already done mine, so now we're going to just jump back into our portal. So the next step we need to do is we need to register our application. So we've created our web app and we need to register that application within Azure. So again, we're going to search for app registrations. So you can see I've already got a couple, but we're going to do a new registration. And we can give that a name. So DBT docs YT app. And you can see that we've got some options here around who can access this service. So I suspect in most cases, this is going to be, the default one is going to be the one you're interested in. So accounting is organizational directory only. Okay, so single tenancy option. You'll then want to go into populate this redirect URL. So we want to set it to web. Now, the URL you want to put in here is, I'll put this in the description, but it is the service that was provisioned on your behalf, and then this at the end here. So I'm just going to go back to my, so you can see mine is called Calm Pebble. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to put that in here instead. And then you can see we've got that .auth login AAD callback in there. Okay, now we can register our application. Okay, so now that is ready, we want to go on to this authentication option here. And we want to select this option, ID tokens, as our kind of flow. Okay, and hit save. So we now need to create a couple of secrets. These secrets are what our JSON file, if you remember down here, so we've got client ID and a secret. So these are variables that it's going to look up. We've got to create the secrets and then we'll create the variables that map to these secrets. Okay, so still within our app registration, certificates and secrets, and we're going to create a new client secret. So at this point, the name isn't too important. So DBT Web App YT and set an expiry. I'm going to use for a maximum of 24 months and I'm going to hit add. Now, you can see it's generated this value, right? This key here. This is the one we want. That's really important that at this point, right now, you make a copy or save that key because this is what we're going to need later. And once you've navigated away from this page and you come back, it will not show you that value. So make a copy of it and keep it somewhere safe. Okay, so now you've got a copy of that. We're going to go back to the overview and you're going to want to make a copy of the application bracket client ID. So this is the other ID we're going to need. So again, just keep a copy of that somewhere safe. Okay. So now we're going to go back to our web app that we created. So here we go. So this is my one. And we are going to go to the configuration page. And we want to add, within this application settings, we need to add 2 variables. So this time the name does matter. The first should be called Azure Client ID. And that's going to be that second value that we saved earlier, that client ID. And paste that in and OK. Then we're going to add a second one. And this one is going to have the name Azure Client Secret. We're going to have that first one that we saved, that client secret that we created. Going to be saved here and OK. So now we can go to save and select general settings, because now we can disable that password that we added. So now you should be able to grab your URL and it will prompt you to authenticate. So because I'm already logged in, it's not going to prompt me, it's just going to log me straight in. So just to demonstrate this, I'm going to copy that URL. I'm going to go to a new private browser tab. And you can see it's going to prompt me to log in. I'm going to do that really quickly. And there we go. We are accessing our DBT documentation securely through a published Azure Web App. And now any other user in your organization can do the same thing. So again, there's really 2 things that we haven't covered here. So one is groups. So if you want to limit your access to the website, we haven't covered that here. If you're experienced with using groups and permissions in Azure, that will probably be quite obvious to you on how to do that, but we won't go through that here. The other part is auto-generating DBT docs documentation in the first place and having it auto-publish. We'll do a separate video on that because it's not incredibly complicated, but it is a little bit more involved. So we'll set that up as a separate video. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. And please, if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Bye.